That's right.
Here we go,
I
D.
broke it.
We're back on. And 5, 4, 3.
I want to say what's up to everybody. Davey D hanging out with you. And we have just concluded the third presidential debate, the last debate. And we assembled a number of people here. But before we get into introducing our guests, I do want to acknowledge that this is a big collaboration that all of us with from various backgrounds and talents have come together. So big shout out to Synergize Live, which we're in their studio here in San Francisco. Also Open Line Media, who we roll with and usually do our tapings for Free Speech. Big shout out to Free Speech TV. And also IgniteDebate, which is Biko Baker, who came all the way out here from Milwaukee to hang with us and bring this leg of the historic tour that they've been doing all around the country. So we're here in San Francisco tonight, and of course the home base, Hard Knock Radio and KPFA. With that being said, our guests include Biko Baker from the League of Young Voters, Pablo Perales, who is with 67 Sunyas. We have Josh Healy, spoken word artist, not just any spoken word artist, but the champs when it comes to slams and what have you, youth organizer. We also have Khalil Jacob Fantouzi. He's a teacher, an activist, and also a mayoral candidate. And then we have from the Green Party, Sherry Honkala, a vice presidential candidate. So we got some heavy hitters here, and I want to thank you all for taking time out. I want to start off with you, Biko. Because, you know, this whole debate, foreign policy, from the work that you all have been doing with people all around the country, is this something that is going to resonate with the folks that you've been organizing, or is it really a domestic thing? Was this something that people would be glued to, or a waste of time?
I mean, I definitely think that in terms of all three of the debates, there was less buzz around this. I don't know if it's because of playoffs or football or what. But in terms of what's going on, I think it's something that we need to.
Look over there so they can see you too.
I have to look this way. I'm sorry. I'm so handsome. I like looking at myself right there. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, Davey, I think it's about the frame. I think unfortunately they have this conversation about fear and these bombs and nuclear threats, and I think young people know that that's not the world we're currently in, and a lot of that is manufactured to make us be crazy. My homeboy Josh Healy just talked about Al Qaeda only had 1,500 people at its height, and yet we're still pushing this narrative. And unfortunately, the president mentioned clean technologies maybe once or twice, and I think that's really where young people are thinking. We know that the cost of war is cutting into our education and making student loans be so high. So, if I had to grade the president and a Romney, I'd give it a C+ in terms of entertainment. It was cool, but there was no fireworks. Although I think Obama did kick his butt. He kicked his butt.
Okay. Sherry Honkala, last time we heard from you, you were being arrested outside the debates in Long Island. And it's good to have you come and share with us your thoughts on this, because you are running for vice president of the United States, and I think that's something that we shouldn't take lightly, primarily because this country prides itself. We just heard a whole debate where people are talking about democracy and having people have their free say-so, et cetera, and the fact that you and your running mate weren't able to be on the stage tonight, I think is something that we should underscore and take note of, and I'm glad that you chose to spend some time with us. You were taking notes and you were looking at a lot of this. Just offhand, what would be your response to any of the points that were raised to draw a contrast to what they're saying and what you and others may be thinking?
Well, first of all, Dr. Jill Stein and I announced today that we're actually suing the Commission on Presidential Debates. The debates are set up by 10 corporations, and it's really time for the men to move over and let the mothers in. And we have a lot to say about the destruction of our environment, the fact that our children are, drinking water that's poisonous. And to vote for Dr. Jill Steiner, myself, would mean clean air and food and jobs and housing and health care for everyone. So they need to let us in.
Anything stand out in the debate, anything that you just looked at, winced at, gave a thumbs up to, Anything that you could agree with?
Well, you know, our foreign policy, it was difficult to agree with anything that they said because our foreign policy would begin from something something very simple yet very important: love. I mean, I dare put this out on the table here. Not just like loving our neighbor in this country and our families, but loving our neighbors across borders. And both of these men were competing to see who could be meaner and, who could, take power and control and kill and waste our money and not bring it back home to take care of very important domestic issues like mass incarceration and the fact that we're neglecting our youth.
Josh Healy, this is it's a dangerous world is what they tell us. You know, I don't know, I haven't been all around the world, but they give us travel warnings and say it's a very dangerous time, and we have to be tough. You know, what stood out to you? Did they have the right tone? Did you get a sense of confidence that if president, that they would keep you safe? Or do you have a different perspective on this?
I got a sense, should I be looking
Yeah.
over? I got a sense that they're very confident that they would love to go to war some more, and that they would love to attack Iran, if not this year, maybe the next year, or maybe the year after that, but they'd be happy to do it. They'd both be happy to do it. And, you know, we were kind of joking, all of us, during the debate, but it's true. I mean, they said the word Israel more than I think any other word in the debate, about how much friends they could be with Israel. And it wasn't just, it wasn't about Israel. It was about, just showing who is going to be tougher on those Arabs and tougher on those Muslims. And one of the code ways of saying it is who will stand with Israel. It's all euphemisms and it's all codes. And we were joking, but I mean, I'm Jewish. And so I say shalom to both, candidates. But you're not running for president of Israel. You're running for president of America. And the world is bigger than Israel and Iran. I mean, I was just thinking about what they're not saying, what countries and continents are not in their view of foreign policy. There was next to no mention of Latin America other than Romney talking about how he could get more trade, more free trade, which would, more neoliberalism, more exploitation, which that, of course, has no effect on immigration because we don't look at that at all. But there was no mention of India, 1 billion people. The whole continent of Africa got one word. I think he said Africa once, not shouting out any particular countries, just the continent. China, of course, is feared. And then Russia is, according to Romney, still our enemy. I think Romney's, foreign policy is really from the 1950s. And Obama's is from the 90s, 80s. None of them have a foreign policy that is about peace or justice. It is about fear. It is about looking backward. And I think folks here know that we need to change that.
Before I bring Khalil and Pedro and Pablo in, were any of you surprised that they didn't mention Greece, which was just going through some upheavals just like less than a week ago?
Romney mentioned Greece a bunch of times. He said that's where we're going. He thinks we're on a highway and it ends in Greece. So he did mention it a bunch of times just to be playful.
Right. Well, what do you think about that? I mean, because it wasn't really in mentioning Greece, and what I should have re-clarified. What you're dealing with is 26% unemployment. What you're dealing with are people that, in theory, could look at austerity measures, which we've been saying would work, aren't working. And what we're looking at is what happens when corporations get their way and what happens when banks get their way in people's economic systems. And so to not really go into it, that, to demonize versus really looking at how are people struggling to come out of something that is really detrimental is what I didn't hear.
Well, that, to me, that's the area where there's the most common ground between the two candidates, right? Romney was quick to talk about food stamps in a superficial kind of way, and I think he was the only one of the two candidates to mention poverty, right? But again, in a superficial kind of way, because that entire section of the country, Romney's come out and got caught, you know, on video saying 47% of Americans, whatever. Obama hasn't been caught saying something like that, but both of them talk about the country as though the only thing that exists is a middle class and rich people who need to be taxed a little more or may not be need to be taxed. But most Americans, last time I looked, are either poor or hovering just above the poverty line and don't exist in these debates. And so just like Greece exists as a name of a country, but the people in their situation doesn't make it into the debate, and food stamps exist as a superficial reality, but the reality of most Americans doesn't make it into the debates. And we talk about everybody like everybody's middle class. I'm like, damn, we got a big middle class in this country from listening to these debates. And Israel's our next door neighbor, but actually that's not true. Actually, we got hella broke folks in this country and they're not addressed by the debates. And actually our next door neighbor is Mexico. And it has a lot to do with our foreign policy, but that didn't come up in the debates. Right. So that's what's real.
Do you think that this is because of political posturing, or do you think this is an ideology that they really have? Like they really don't see poor people and that they really have a love for Israel? I mean, or is this something that like, look, I got to say this to get these undecided votes in Florida or appeal to somebody in your part of the world, the Midwest? That's why they're doing this, because of you, Biko.
No, I mean, I think at the end of the day, Adam talked about it, you know,
Adam Manzak,
right? Talked about Citizens United and, you know, JPAC. These folks will come beat you up, man, like literally through money. I think that's part to do with it.
Okay. Khalil, how are you seeing this?
Well,
what stood out for you?
It looked like it was two colonial masters talking about their colonies. It reminded me of 1898 Treaty of Paris, when Puerto Rico, the island that my folks come from, was given to Spain. It felt like they were, you know, talking about countries relative to how friendly they are to the United States and not talking about the well-being of the people of that country. So it just felt like something where people are commodities, where it's all about the United States and how people are treating us, and not really talking about issues of justice and what's right for the people in their respective countries. And then you have somebody like Romney saying that he's interested in freedom and human rights, and the way he's going to do that is by increasing military spending.
You all of us have been to different countries around the world. How do you think this is playing out in some of the places that you've been to, including, you know, Puerto Rico?
Well, I mean, I've traveled to Ghana, to Togo, to Egypt, to the Caribbean extensively, and they were not even mentioned. So, I mean, I feel like if you are, you know,
well, Egypt was,
you know, Egypt was, but in terms of like the Caribbean, or I mean, imagine being somebody living in another part of the world where you're not even mentioned at all. You must feel like, you know, that your life doesn't matter, your country's vision doesn't matter. It makes it feel like the only area that matters are places that the United States could capitalize off of financially.
And you don't have to wait to the debate to realize that you don't matter and that your life doesn't matter. You can notice that we're running on 15 people murdered recently by Border Patrol at the U.S.-Mexico border. That's a foreign policy issue if you've ever heard one, right? We're murdering citizens from our next-door neighbors, and there's no judicial process for that, right? But that's not going to make it into the debate. One thing I want to say is I think this is I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this is a social justice-oriented circle right here, right? I think a lot of times we drift into the same thing that happens on the spin circles on television, and we pretend like the chess game and the horse race is what it's all about. And I've never, you know, kind of drank that Kool-Aid personally. And I think a lot of folks at this table, I've seen y'all on the streets, and you don't drink that Kool-Aid. So at the end of the day, I almost care less about what comes out of the mouth of these two cats and their great, you know, speech writers, et cetera, et cetera. I care a lot more about what our movements are going to do about these two cats, because none of them have a sexy plan for us if you care about social justice, right? And what I see happen too often is our posture toward an Obama administration scares me more than a Romney administration. That's some controversial shit to say, and we can chew the fat on that. But what I saw under the Bush administration, for example, is a lively-ass anti-war movement, is a lively migrant justice movement, largest marches in this country's history. They won't teach that in your history class, but those were the largest marches in history. 2006, 2007, you saw millions of folks on the streets demanding legalization for all undocumented folks. 12 million people in this country that don't exist in these debates, right? And what did we see by 2008? Shriveled up, right? Because hope and change is now what we're facing in the presidency rather than Big Bad Bush, right? So I'm very fearful of that. I'm more fearful of that than I am of either of the rhetoric.
Why haven't we seen the movements take off if this is really about Sherry? I mean, Hunkler, in 2008, you all had thousands of people outside the RNC. You also had people outside the DNC. And I know also this year there were movements, but they weren't as lively. And if the name of the game, and on our previous panel, you were talking about this, Biko, that people have to push these no matter who's in the office. So building off of Pablo's situation, what's it going to take to really keep those movements going?
Well, first of all, we have to keep in mind not only is half of all Americans living in poverty right now, that when we talk about murder abroad, we're also talking about murder at home. The billions of dollars that have been spent to keep us safe from outside terrorists have really been about preempting civil liberties here at home. We now have the ability to, the president has the authority to kill anybody and has the authority to detain somebody indefinitely. And I was reminded of that the other night as Dr. Jill Stein, a Harvard graduate, we've got, 85% of the population can vote for us, and we sat handcuffed to 2 metal chairs for 8 hours without being able to make a phone call or do anything like that. So if they can do that to, a Harvard doctor running for president in this country, we all know what's really happening every day across this country, and that's why we have more people in prison than any place else in the entire world. And those things are very real. And so, they can't talk about Greece because they know, either we're going to organize some independent political motion in this country, and Jill and I are going to go to the greenhouse, or we're going to go to the penitentiary. Because things are not going to remain where you talk about, what's happening in Mexico. Just every day in this country, 45,000 people every year die because they don't have access to health care. And a lot of them are undocumented immigrants who the president could have chosen to provide them, with the DREAM Act, provide them health care. And yet, Eduardo, a young kid that I knew from Kansas, died in this country under his watch by the United States government because he couldn't get a heart, because he couldn't prove that he would have ongoing health care. This is very real.
Josh?
Can I just clarify something about that? Because there's a couple details to it, and it's really reflective of what's going on in this country, right? I think what you're talking about is DACA and ACA. And DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is not an executive order. Can I repeat that? Not an executive order, because it's been peddled that way in media. It was a memo from the Department of Homeland Security that slightly switches current policy and that is not standing law. And this was a last-minute effort by the Obama administration after having record deportations, beating every president in history with 1.5 million deportations, to pretend like, oh, yeah, Latino voters care about this. Let me throw something at you a little bit before the election. Right after DACA, which was not executive action, he moved lightning quickly to pass an executive order, 2 executive orders, to prevent any of the beneficiaries from DACA from qualifying for the Affordable Care Act.
Well, let me ask you this. And this, if we're looking at it with a social justice lens, this conversation, that was Pablo Padres speaking from 67 Sonias. You can't really blame Barack Obama for millions of people not being out in the streets in 2012. We can't blame that president for these movements stopping unless he came directly and said, Josh, you can't organize anymore. Khalil, you can't bring people out on the march. Biko, you can't, bring 100 people, But let me start off with, let me get with you, Josh. I mean, for example, we had, you both have been in Wisconsin around the whole thing with the labor situation. Where's the momentum to keep that going no matter who's in the White House? Or is this really about putting somebody in the White House and then hoping that they will kick back certain favors and perks? So it's not really a movement to have for the long run. It's really about putting somebody in there, getting a favor, and having it returned. And look in the camera that way.
Yeah, so, I mean, to me, I agree with Pablo that is one of, if not the big questions, is what are we doing? Not just who are we voting for, but what are we doing before election, after election, and what is electoral strategy? And one of the things that I do like about what Obama said when he first was elected was, you need to keep pressuring me. I need you to keep pressuring me. I want you to keep pressuring me to the left. He said that to the left, and the left, we did not do that.
Well,
some of us did. Some of us did, but most of us are not used to having a 4-year, 40-year movement strategy about building both electorally and non-electorally. So you talked about Wisconsin, and I mean, to me, you had these two great movements this past year in terms of labor rights and economic justice. You also had, in a second, the immigrant rights movement, and that was beautiful, and the you know, the undocu-queer movement, which is doing great. But you had the Wisconsin uprising, and then you had Occupy and Occupy Wall Street, and they both started with huge momentum and huge energy, and they've both kind of fizzled, but I think for different reasons. And this is something that might be controversial as well, but we're having fun here, so let's throw it out. I think my feeling about Wisconsin, and Biko, you know, is there on the ground more than me, so he can speak to it.
But you're from there.
My feeling is that the Wisconsin movement, which has started as a grassroots movement, got too electoral and put all its eggs in the recall basket and was co-opted in large part by the Democratic Party and the top non-democratic labor unions, not the grassroots labor unions, but the top. Meanwhile, you had Occupy and Occupy Oakland and many other Occupies that decided we're not going to do anything electoral. Not just anything electoral, but we're not going to build coalitions with anyone else. And so you had this kind of purism that didn't work. And for me, it's about, and I think for a lot of us here, it's about being smart and strategic with our electoral strategy and otherwise, so that, for example, I'll say, for the record, I'm not voting for Obama in the state of California. I'm voting for Jill Stein and Sherry Honkala on the Green Party. If I still lived in the state of Wisconsin, which is a swing state, I would vote for Obama with no illusions. With no illusions, and I would be organizing and fighting no matter who was in the office. If the Green Party was in the office, I'd be organizing and fighting, and I know they'd want me to. So that's the type of thing that I think, can we be nuanced? Can we not be purist? But can we don't have to be purist, but we still have to have our principles. And I think we can do that. I think if Obama's taught us anything, is that we have to fight. We have to understand electoral politics for what it is, but also for what it's not.
Khalil, let me bring you in. You're in Berkeley. Berkeley has always been a ground zero place for movements. You also teach. Let me see if you can wear the two hats. One is all this movement work that people have talked about. Does that translate to the students that you teach? And in being in Berkeley and traveling and doing what you're doing, what has happened with the movement there, which has always been a place that people look to and said, oh, yeah, you know, or have people just fallen back?
Well, I know that that my assignment was for the kids to watch the debate tonight. So I know some of them are going to do it and at least have that discussion. I know that also that the events that we had recently, like Life is Living at Defirmary Park, which is in West Oakland where I teach, that those are events where my students feel a sense of community, where they get knowledge. It's not always necessarily in a protest or direct action, but it is about community organizing and educating people that the idea of going green and being green is an urban thing just as much as anywhere else. As I've been running for mayor of Berkeley, it is interesting because there are no Republican candidates, but yet we have such a wide spectrum of Democrats that there are many Democrats that look very Republican and act very Republican. So, and it's also a city that has lived off of the legacy of the 60s, of the free speech movement, of the Black Panthers. And there hasn't been the same type of activism. When I was a student, when you were a student at UC Berkeley, there was a different demographic. There was a different class experience in terms of the students, and also the amount of students of color. When affirmative action was taken away, the students at that university are no longer the students that were there. So the protests and direct actions and things that you saw are no longer visible.
David,
so it is a challenge.
Let me jump in on this because you know, I see every day I go to the street and I see kids doing, I guess I got to look this way. Every day I see kids doing amazing stuff, man. Like kids coming up with ideas to solve the problems in their community. And the truth is, you know, 20, 30 years ago, it was working class people on these college campuses doing this stuff. Now we're not getting to college because we can't afford it because the prices have gone too high. And I think a lot of times we beat ourselves up as activists because we don't have these big mass movements. But all over the country, you see kids organizing. Right now in Texas, our Texas organizers had big old lines for early voting. You know, and they just don't talk about early voting. They're going to talk about Trayvon Martin. They're going to talk about Oscar Grant. You know, we're going to talk about Darius Simmons in Wisconsin. I see an uprising coming. And I think regardless of who's in office, people are so pissed and so angry that I believe, you know, I think some change is on the horizon. I think both candidates can address it because we're about to knock it over.
You know, interesting that you mentioned about the early voting. What wasn't talked about in the debate, which I think is a foreign policy issue, is the fact that the UN is actually sending monitors over to our country to monitor our elections.
That's right.
And that I thought is pretty interesting because
yeah,
oftentimes we talk about going to these other things. Thoughts on that you actually have the UN coming over to monitor our elections because the suppression tactics are so great right now that is everybody's looking and going, wow, this is not fair.
I think election, the attitude toward free and fair elections that we have in the world is just total triple speak, fuck double speak, right? Excuse me. But it's reality, right? We look at a place like Venezuela that has like the most record turnout and has so many UN observers, and we call them, you know, totalitarians, anti-democratic, right? And then we watch the Mexican elections and we pump money into them, and we watch it be bought. And we go, oh, that's a perfect example of democracy. And we know we have the history right here of a president that was not elected by popular vote and then was elected by the Supreme Court. And we act like, you know, our stuff don't funk. And so I think way past due to start monitoring our own elections, way past due.
So let's build off that. What is a movement around voter suppression? If you have the UN bringing this up and saying these elections and the process looks pretty shady, what is our responsibility as people who have a social justice background, that have movement? I know that, you know, you all have been saying you're monitoring and you're suing, but do you bring those thousands of people that I saw when you were outside the RNC in 2008 to these elections, no matter what, to change the process once and for all?
Well, first of all, the fastest growing party right now in Pennsylvania is the Green Party, and that's no accident because I live there. And so all those folks on Mutter Street in Kensington, the poorest area, it took about 5 seconds, knock on their door, explain the 3 different platforms, and whoa, they became a Green. And that's what we're seeing happening across the entire country. But also I've met with, you know, I have friends across the entire world, and I've been talking about how the election process here is absolutely corrupt. That in my neighborhood, it's the #1 day of employment is election day, and I live in a Democratic Party city where real crazy things have been happening. You know, you get free socks, toasters, you know, you can buy a bag of dope, whatever on election day because there's so much money to spread around. And then you're supposed to have, you know, a minority party in there on election day, and there's only one political party that's always in there. So you can do anything you want to the voting booths and stuff like that. So the thing is we are, you know, scaring the hell out of the gangsters, the Democrats in Kensington right now because people are becoming conscious, and we can't get enough poll certificates because, you know, we don't have enough people yet, but we're working on getting those people. But they're just like terrified because there might be an objective human being standing there at the polls for the first time in years, where every city council person goes to prison, and where every person that's runs in our city council, you basically have to be born into office. Whether it's the Rizzo family or the Good family, whoever it is, we've got a horrible legacy of corruption, and it's across the entire country.
You have your own Richard Daley's.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
But we're trying to get there, but people are still unconscious. They still think somehow they can sit this thing out. And that's the only reason I decided to run, because after 25 years of taking over abandoned houses and 200 arrests, going to jail, we have to teach people that we got to keep one foot in the movement, but we have to build an independent political motion in this country. I don't care what party you want to call it. And right now, I see the only viable party being the Green Party, because they don't take any money from corporations. But if we don't build seriously, we're going to continue to see death and incarceration.
Dave, we fight voter suppression. And there's gangsters all over, but they're not real gangsters. I mean, you want to be real gangster, come to the Haven Woods where I'm from. You see some real gangsters. But unfortunately, they have used this system of the data file, the voter file, and the technology to suppress our community. We did this experiment in Wisconsin. We knocked 100,000 doors. We found out that 62% of the people on this 62% of African Americans on this voter file had been displaced. So right there is the open. You don't know who's there. I'm not even on the voter file, and I voted every single election at my house since 2006. We have to take over local government. We have to take over the election commissions. We have to bring our technology into these places, and we have to force all levels of government to modernize
with
technology.
That people need to run then?
They need to run, but we also have to bring technology into the government. I'm telling you, there's 75-year-old guys with suspenders on, running these databases that don't talk to each other, and it's expensive. It's why people go to jail, and we can't track them, and they're always being tracked but not tracked. We've got a lot of problems.
Let me ask all of you all this as we're coming down towards the end. One of you all said, and I think it might have been you, Josh, about coalition building. And I wanted to just focus on that for a second in the sense that if you have a movement in Madison, and it's based around labor, is that labor movement connecting with the 300 or 400 people that I've seen you bring out this Saturday, which is, sometimes it's around immigration, or when I've seen you do immigration things. And is that immigration component connecting, say, with police brutality around, say, the Trayvon Martin, so that when somebody speaks about Trayvon, they automatically, and they talk about vigilante killing, they connect it to vigilante killings going on in brown communities, and they connect that with literally vigilante killings that we've seen in the labor movement, because the labor movement's supposed to be worldwide. So if you are a member of a union in the United States, you care about your union brothers in South Africa, where they were being shot and killed, and we didn't talk about that in the debates tonight as well, which would have brought up the whole issue about labor conditions. We didn't talk about the labor situation in China, where the iPod, they talked about China, but they didn't talk about the exploitation of workers there. Mm-hmm. But I bring all that up to say that if we're talking about building movements, how do you start to connect those dots so that it's seamless and it's intuitive when it comes up, and it's not something that's like an exception to the rule, but it's the norm? And I'll start off with you, Josh.
Beautiful. The million-dollar question. How do you build the movement we all want and need and have been trying to build for so many years? It's work, it's hard, and it's the only thing we can do. There's no alternative. It's the only thing that will actually make change. It's the only thing that we have seen that works is broad coalitions. The idea of solidarity that is both self-interest and selflessness. It is that combination that I think brings out the best in people, which is that I am doing this, yes, for myself and for my children. And I'm knowing that doing it for my neighbors and my neighboring countries, for them, is out of love, out of the, this. And that comes back and helps me again. And I think people understand that on the daily level. I think people are good. We're talking about a foreign policy of love. I think that this is the basis of, you know, a worldview, which is, and it's a worldview people understand, and people are loving, people are generous, but we get manipulated to our lowest common denominator, and we need to ask people to reach towards their highest and better and most spiritual self. And then spirituality is something we don't talk about. How do we build those movements? To answer your question, is to be really honest about with each other and with ourselves that we might not understand each other on everything. You know, I don't understand everything that's going on the border with Mexico. I don't understand all the environmental issues in the world. I do know that we have a common enemy, which is the corporate and political and media elite that doesn't just run our country but runs the world. So we have a common enemy, and that there is strength in numbers. And there is strength in unity, and I think that we have, our diversity is not our weakness, it's our strength.
And I think it has to be through education and consciousness raising, because I feel that when you teach injustice and when people feel it for themselves in their neighborhoods, if they realize that that same injustice is happening in other places, they could feel that. They know what that feels like. And I think that a lot of the time it's not that people don't want to support each other, it's they don't know about what's happening in other parts of the world. Unfortunately, our educational system is not one of the best systems of education. When we talk and when we look at our textbooks, it's not talking about the current situations of what's happening to black and brown people in our country. So I think it has to be through a paradigm shift. It has to be through consciousness raising, and it's actually about getting people upset enough to want to take action. You know, the reason why I'm running for mayor is not because I see myself as a career politician. It's because I'm somebody who has fought for KPFA free speech, gone to Puerto Rico and Vieques and got arrested out there. It's because I want to see this conversation happening where it hasn't happened traditionally. And that's the same reason why we are all stepping it up and making sure that we don't just talk about doing organizing by walkouts and throwing rocks from the outside, but we have to organize on the inside and on the outside at the same time.
Sherry?
I think that, first of all, while we're very encouraged and excited by a lot of the stuff that we've been seeing with Occupy across the country, we also have a responsibility to learn from our ancestors and our elders. And I really don't think that we do enough of that. Just sitting down and having conversations with our elders about lessons that they've learned throughout history. And we've kind of like written that off, like that's not the thing right now. We're just going to, you know, come up with all the answers on our own, or we don't have to look at history. And I think that we have to go back and not be ahistorical. I think the other thing is that we have to figure out how to get off this argument about who's got the worst seat on the Titanic, and figure out how we build a raft and get the hell off together. And we don't have enough of those conversations. And the other thing about running for office has done is it's forced us to say, well, here's the solution around this issue, and this issue. And this is my vision of the kind of world that I live in.
Okay.
So,
Pablo.
So, keeping in the controversial tradition that me and my brother Josh have started at this table session, I want to throw something else on the table, and that's race and class and how it plays out in our movements. So I would agree 100% with Josh on Wisconsin, even though I have no business talking about what happened in Wisconsin. But it seems really rational to me, because when I look at the immigrants' rights movement and how it went from that powerful, massive, they were calling sleeping giant that woke up, to this very passive, like nobody in the streets, even on May Day kind of movement. What I saw happen was exactly what you described in Wisconsin. Co-optation by a lot of folks, a lot of the nonprofit industrial complex, taking what was a grassroots movement and turning it into an electoral push that didn't have any edge past the election of Barack Obama, right? So I saw that happen. On the Occupy front, and this is where I want to throw race and class, I would diagnose it a little different. I think when we start talking about 1% and 99%, the seats on the Titanics matter a little bit, because some folks got on boats and some folks didn't. And just like the president and Romney don't talk about anybody but the middle class, the Occupy movement in large part was made up early on and in the places where it got biggest by folks that weren't on the lower end of that 99%. And they were framing a lot of discussions in ways that didn't appeal to that 47% that gets kicked out of the conversation by the political parties and the movements. That's what I want to get to, is we live in the United States where the nonprofit industrial complex is something that's bigger than any other country has ever seen. We've never seen such a sophisticated movement containing apparatus as we have in this country. I know because I work for it. And everything I do in spite of it. Because if you allow yourself to be dictated what you can and can't do by the resources and the structures and the strategies and the logic models that the nonprofit industrial complex has in this country, you will get nothing done. You'll put a lot of shit on a donor page, but you will get nothing done. And that's where a lot of our movement work, unfortunately, is centered out of. So that's why movements die like that and get pacified like that. And that is race and class, because we have a whole lot of middle class white folks dominating that nonprofit industrial complex, and they just sort of know how to play just the right amount of the community's needs to get a few faces at a march, to get a few faces in front of a fundraising effort. But that's not building community power. That's tokenism. Right. Community power looks like completely independent of what's going to happen at the board meeting at that nonprofit and at the program design at that nonprofit. Folks in the community defining their issues, building community power independent of that. And that's what movements look like. That's what it took to make a civil rights movement, to then go to the electoral game with a strategy and say, hey, we got power and you're going to listen to us, right, rather than the other way around. We'll get you elected and then hopefully you'll kick something our way.
Right. And Biko, you've been doing this in spite of too.
Yeah, but you know, same thing I've been saying in the tours. Like, I think Republicans are corny. I think Democrats are corny. I think a lot of people that run nonprofits are corny. But I run a fairly large nonprofit that has me hustling and chasing money all the time. But I know that we're changing kids' lives. You can come to our communities and see that we're virtually changing the neighborhoods. We're changing people's mindsets. We're changing the conversation at the local electoral level. I got the story. I was in the club. This lady came up to me. I was like, oh, okay, I'm uncomfortable. I'm married. She's like, no, I know you. I'm the mayor's executive assistant. And I was like, whoa, I've never even had a conversation with the mayor. And it's that type of stuff that people see us doing. And the reason why we're able to do it is because we have an agenda. We don't go all over the place. We stay focused. These last 2 years, we've been focused on voter ID, and through that common struggle, we've been able to build a movement. And are we getting 2 million people in the streets? No, it's not the Million Man March, but I do know that young people in our neighborhoods are smarter about politics than I was when I was their age, and I'm proud of that.
As we close out tonight's foreign policy debate, the third debate, what do you leave people with? What's the strong message that you want to leave folks with that are listening or watching that they really should have gotten from this? Either it was omitted or something that was said that really stood out to you that you say, bingo. I'll start off with you, Biko.
Well, I was tweeting, and I just think when are we going to talk about climate change, man? Like, it is at the crib where I'm at, it's 70 degrees. I'm going to get home off the plane. It's going to be 65
in Milwaukee?
degrees. Yeah. I mean, it's been crazy. It was 100 degrees all summer. It's never been like this. This is because of the rise of global industrial capitalism, and we haven't checked it, and it's killing us.
Okay, Pablo, 30 seconds or less?
30 seconds or less. Again, I'm strategic about my elections. I will not be voting for Barack Obama this time around. I voted with tears in my eyes the first time around, and I hope brown folks don't. I hope in California folks really sit it out or vote a third party, because I think as long as this party can take for granted this community, have record deportations, militarize the border, throw drones at that shit, and still get our vote, we're going to get laughed at. We're not going to get any kind of change, any kind of migrant justice action from the electoral system.
What about Supreme Court? That doesn't make a difference?
What about this? Oh, because we got a token, member of the Supreme Court.
I mean, but there will
Bush
be appointees.
had a very diverse cabinet. In fact, he started that whole platform of, I'm going to have diversity in the faces that I have around me, but not my policy and its repercussions, right? So that's nothing. Not when there's record-breaking deportations. Not when there's more people killed on the border now than ever in recent history. Not when Anastasio Rojas took a beating from 18 Border Patrol agents, tased 5 times until he bled to death, screaming out for help, and nobody was even prosecuted in the case because we got modern-day lynchings. That's how bad it is, right? When it's at that level, we're getting laughed at. We are not being taken seriously. And a party that can get our vote, even though having 2/3 of Congress and having the president and having a mandate doesn't do anything, doesn't bring up your issue. We could quote Malcolm X and the way he spoke about what the Democratic Party did to black folks in his era, the way that the Democratic Party is treating brown folks in this era. We could say the same thing. We're political chumps right now.
Okay. Sherry?
neither Mitt Romney or Obama spoke to any of the issues impacting the majority of the people that are in this country right now, whether it was the folks that I met with recently in West Virginia or the folks in Chicago or in the streets of Kensington. And I just want to encourage people that whoever you vote for, don't vote the person, vote their party program and what they plan to do. And a vote for Jill Stein and Sherry Honkala means a vote against militarization. It means a vote for health care, for housing, against mass incarceration, to deal with the climate change issue in this country. So, you know, it's time for us to get our numbers together, our troops together. Today, if people were to vote, 3.2 million people would vote for us. Now, those are troops, and we want to do something with those troops. If we get 5%, that means we get $20 million beginning the next election. And those of us that know how to do a lot on $1.95, do you know what we could do with $20 million? Look out.
Khalil, anything stood
First of all,
out?
I want to make sure that my students know that there are other parts of the world besides the countries mentioned. So as somebody who teaches history, I hope to pull out a map and show them all the places that were not talked about. And I think that it's critical that we recognize that in democracy, it never states that there should be a two-party system. When Nelson Mandela was finally let out of jail in South Africa, there's 26 different political parties. And that the more political parties you have, the more diversity of opinions and of politics and of radical politics. So I think it is critical that we understand that we need to build other political parties as well. And I think that the other thing is critical is that people realize that voting is not just about national politics, that it's not just about Obama and Romney. There are so many critical issues locally that people can vote and will have a direct impact on their lives. In Berkeley, if you support Measure S, people sitting down on the ground will be arrested. The Sid Lai law is something that Tom Bates, the current mayor, is pushing in our city. So if we don't educate ourselves about the local propositions, the local issues, making sure that the school board members and that the city council members are people that represent our politics, then we've forgotten that it's not just about national stuff, it's also about local.
Josh, anything stand out?
Whether
Anything you want to leave with?
Just this, whether you vote for Obama or the Green Party or nobody or God forbid Romney, the debate we saw tonight, the world is huge, the debate was tiny. We got to change the debate. We got to broaden the debate, and we got to change the debate. So that's our job.
And I want to thank our guests for being here, Biko Baker, Pablo Padres, Khalil Jacobs Fantuzzi, Sherry Honkala, and Josh Healy. I would just leave people with the thought of, you know, all of us have a responsibility to change the game. Every last one of us. Whether we like what we saw on the debate tonight between those two candidates, they've changed the game in their respective worlds and for the people that are getting behind them. For better or for worse, they figured out how to do it, and it's happening, and the train is moving. The challenge for everybody else is how you going to move the train either in your direction or build your own train, and that's really going to start with a full-fledged commitment, the one that maybe Barack Obama had 12 years ago or 13 years ago or 20 years ago when he thought he was going to run for president, or the same type of ambition that Mitt Romney had when he decided he was going to be this businessman and parlay that to the next level. And I think you were right when you said many of us have kind of shortchanged ourselves. We move to this level, we stop, we go home, or we think it ends when somebody else gets into position and we're expecting them to do our bidding. And I think we're at the age now where we have 10 good years under our belts of activism to know that nobody will do our bidding unless we're doing it ourselves. And so that should be a lesson that we take to heart. And tonight's debate and the lack of diversity in terms of what they spoke about should be a clear indicator. If not, I don't know what will. So I want to thank everybody. Looks like it's raining. I want to thank our partners, Hard Knock Radio, Ignite Debate, Synergize Live, and Open Line Media for holding us down. I want to thank you all for watching. We're out. Peace, everybody.
You brought the rain.
You brought the rain. Make it rain, baby.